Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 41.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have a great interview with Justin Gaither. He is a founder of Roomsurf and Textsurf, two great websites that are available to help families figure out the roommate and the textbook situation. So we're going to talk with Justin about finding a roommate, and this is a process that can start for a lot of families early in the senior year, or certainly by mid-senior year. We start learning who your roommate might be when you're off to college. So we have a lot of great information. As always, we have show notes available at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/41. All right, let's jump into the interview. All right, today I'm sitting down with Justin Gaither. He's a co-founder of eCampus Ventures, and they've got a couple different websites and programs that are great for aspiring college kids. So welcome, Justin.
Thank you, Brad. Happy to be with you.
Before we jump into the details of some of your websites, can you tell us a little about yourself and your journey so far and how you came to be involved in these things?
Sure, yeah. Well, I went to high school in Long Island, New York, and decided to go to college down at the University of Miami. And it was there where I kind of started my entrepreneurial kind of mindset, and I had actually started a couple of different ventures while I was a student at the University of Miami. The first kind of big business that I started was helping students maximize the space in their dorm rooms by building loft beds, which basically is a structure that elevates the bed in the dorm room so that there's space for a futon couch, a big screen TV, things like that. So that kind of led me into doing what we're doing now, which is a website called Roomsurf.com. When we were advertising for the loft business, I noticed that all of the incoming freshmen at our school were trying to find compatible roommates to live with on their class Facebook group. And we just were seeing a lot of, almost hundreds and hundreds of posts about, looking for roommates, and they would post all this information about themselves, like, some of their interests, what time they go to bed, how clean they are. And by the end of the summer, there would be hundreds of pages of just text that you would have to read through to try to identify someone to live with. And we just thought that was a really inefficient way of going about finding a roommate, and kind of had this idea of, there should be like an eHarmony or Match.com for finding a compatible roommate in college. And to our surprise, there was no service out there that was already doing it. So we decided to create a solution after seeing a clear problem that students at our school were experiencing. And we launched Roomsurf in 2010 and have had just under 700,000 students from 1,000 different schools across the country sign up since we launched. Okay,
so why don't we jump into that a little bit? If I'm a parent of a high school junior, senior, and we're looking down, college, it sounds like you could help students find their incoming freshman roommate. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. We've got an algorithm that we developed, which is actually, it uses questions that students were asking themselves on Facebook when we first identified the problem. So we ask questions like, how outgoing are you? What's your policy on visitors and guests? What time you go to bed? Are you a smoker, non-smoker? Things that really matter when living with another person in small quarters. And our algorithm basically asks students a question about themselves. And then we ask them how their ideal roommate should respond to that question. And they can select multiple options that apply. And then we weight each question by importance so that the algorithm takes into account, things that might be deal breakers. Like if I don't want to live with a smoker, I can rate that as very important, and that that's going to be a deal breaker on the survey. So yes, we do help students find compatible roommates to live with. After they kind of complete that survey, they'll be able to see everyone that has signed up for our service at their school, ranked from their best match to their worst match. So matches are presented as a compatibility percentage. And so from there, they can filter down into things like, where their preferred housing preference might be, what they're studying, some of their planned activities on campus. And they can then, browse profiles and communicate directly with potential matches and kind of figure out who they'd like to live with. And then basically what happens from there is once a student has found someone that they're interested in and they kind of discuss it and decide that interest is mutual, they can both then submit a mutual request to live together on their housing application. And different schools do that different ways. So and a lot of times it might just be a simple email, or it's an actual application that you fill out by paper or an online system. But that's pretty much the process if we're not working directly with the school. Now, on the other hand, we actually do partner directly with schools. And in those cases, you can actually submit your roommate requests directly from the Roomsurf website.
Wow, great. So let's back up a little bit and why don't you give us a little more kind of how it works today? Because I think I went to college, but I was, I graduated many, many years ago now, and it was pre-Facebook, pre-internet. Internet kind of evolved just as I was in college. So in the old days, you just kind of showed up to college and you were assigned a roommate and you shook hands. The first day you showed up for orientation, you said, "Oh, here's my roommate." And that's the way it worked. How does it generally work today with Facebook and internet and email and all that stuff? If you don't use your app, what do they just assign you one still, or how does it?
Sure. So before kind of Facebook, what most schools did was they would send a questionnaire with a few questions. It wasn't as in depth as what we're doing now, and the university's residence life or housing department would match their students by hand based on those responses. And then what's happened, since Facebook has become such a popular social network for students, what was happening was that the students would receive their roommate assignments from the school right before fall move-in, and now there's this social network where people can look each other up, and so students were kind of checking out their roommate assignments and finding things that they didn't like about them, and so they would call the school and say, "Hey, so-and-so has these pictures on their profile. I need you to find me a different roommate. I'm not comfortable living with this person." So it kind of created a problem for a lot of the housing and residence life departments, where now there's this social network where, you can kind of see everyone. So we kind of have the mentality that, why not just create a service where these students can self-select so they can avoid, these issues before they come about after the roommate assignments are sent out. And a lot of schools will actually just do random assignments, which, may or may not work out, depending on how flexible you are with, another person's lifestyle preferences. So that's kind of how it used to work. But now a lot of schools will, I'd say about 80% of the schools will allow you to submit a mutual roommate request, and they will try to honor that the best that they can, as long as you send that, before the housing deadline, which is typically at the end of May.
Okay, so this whole process, when should you start this process?
What we see is a lot of students that are getting accepted for early decision, which is, could be as early as November, the year before you would go for the following fall. So as soon as you get your acceptance letter, what I would tell students to do is to try to identify, a community where other accepted students are getting together. So what a lot of students do is they will create a class Facebook group. So right now it's the class of 2019, and they'll be able to connect with other students that have been accepted to that school, or that may have applied to that school and are waiting an admissions decision. And that's a great way to just start to, meet students that might be going there or that have already committed, and start to identify people that you might want to live with. So I guess the answer is, as soon as you get that acceptance letter, and maybe even before you've actually decided where you want to go, you might want to join a few different groups and get a sense for the students that are going to be going there.
Right. So you can start doing some roommate type research typically in your senior year.
Right.
And then, all right, so let's say you're now accepted at XYZ school, and the typical acceptance is going to be near the end of your senior year, April, and then you turn around and accept the school back. So May 1st, you've decided to attend a particular school. When does a typical school assign your roommate?
So it varies by school, but those typically go out sometime over the summer. I would think, June, July timeframe. It really just depends on the school and how they kind of manage their process. Some of the schools that do, rolling admissions, I think they might send out the roommate assignments as the requests kind of come in, or as students kind of get accepted to kind of fill out those housing spots. So it really just varies by school.
Right. Okay, so if I want to use your services, then to be proactive about how my rooming situation is going to apply, then I really need to start focusing on it, perhaps even before I'm made my final decision as to what school.
Absolutely. And we see a lot of students that do that. A lot of students will join these Facebook groups or sign up for Roomsurf before they've even been accepted at a school. And they'll even hop around to different school networks on our site or join different groups on Facebook, again, to try to get a sense for the students that are going there. And, sometimes we've even seen scenarios where a student will meet someone, become such great friends, over Facebook or through Roomsurf, that will actually be their final reason for going to a particular school because of the connection that they made on social media.
Wow. Okay. And then how do you deal with, or when you say roommate, that implies that two people to a room, although I think there's now some housing options that may have 3 or 4. Is there any accommodations for that, or how prevalent is that at a typical school?
So most of the schools that we support are typically 2 to a room. Our site, we're actually working on pushing another update to our service that would accommodate rooms of 3 or more. So that would also apply to students that might be living off campus in a off campus apartment or house or something like that. But right now the service is primarily dedicated to matching 2 students that would live together for on-campus housing. Okay.
And then how does the service, how do you pay for the service? Or do you pay for the service? Or
Yeah, so that kind of depends on the school. So what we've done in some situations is we actually work directly we have about 5 or 6 university clients that actually pay for the service so that their students get to use the service for free for all 4 years. So in those cases, there's no cost to the student. If we don't have a direct relationship with the school, the student would have to pay a one-time $20 fee to be able to view more detailed profile information and to be able to actually communicate with their matches, as well as find their matches on other social media sites like Facebook and Twitter, if they want to check them out there.
All right. So any other, thoughts on the roommate process? Any hints or tips that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate that, parents and students should be thinking about, roommates as early as acceptance or even before acceptance. Again, there's a lot of ways that students nowadays can connect with other students that have applied to a particular school and kind of build, their social networks through these social media sites like Facebook and Twitter and Roomsurf. So I would highly recommend that students try to, engage with the community early. And then the other thing I would say is, as the year kind of progresses and you get through early decision, early action, and then regular decision, which is typically in the April timeframe, just realize that more and more students will be getting accepted and be looking for roommates. And so you also don't have to rush in making a decision. It might behoove students to wait until April when more students have come into the pool, because there'll be more potential roommate matches later in the year to choose from.
Okay. Now, what typically happens if you're not getting along with a roommate?
Well, I think that depends on, the school's policies. I know when I was in college, some of my friends had to request to get moved to a different room if things get that bad. And sometimes the school can accommodate that and sometimes they can't. So in those situations, I think you just have to tough it out for the semester or for the year. But yeah, I think it really just kind of depends on how the school handles that. Once you've been placed, it's kind of up to the housing department on whether or not they can accommodate a room change during the year. And that's one of the reasons that some of the schools have decided to work with Roomsurf, because they want to try to reduce the amount of room changes, because that's an administrative headache for them to take on, in the middle of a academic semester.
Right. I guess, I would agree with that it's a challenge. And the way most families need to be thinking about it is as you arrive as a freshman, a lot of times you don't know many people on the campus. Looking for your roommate for your sophomore year can be a little bit easier because now you've got friends and you know people. Of course, the caution there is a good friend may not make a good roommate.
Oh, absolutely. That's very, very true. We hear stories about that, quite a bit. And at the end of the day, your roommate doesn't have to be someone that you're best friends with. It just has to be someone that, you're comfortable with and that, will respect your things. And, it's just someone that you're comfortable with. It doesn't have to be, your best friend by any means. But on the other hand, sometimes we see stories of girls that meet on Roomsurf and they become best friends. So it kind of depends on, your personality and kind of what you're looking for.
Right. What's your opinion of I'm in a room with someone I know because there's 5 or 6 people going to this particular college from my high school, so I'm going to pick one of those high school kids and room with them. Do you think that's a good idea or bad idea?
I don't know if I would say it's good or bad. My thoughts are I think it would be better to try to branch out and try to meet new people. You're going to have a lot of opportunities to do that. Even outside of your dorm room, like in your classes and different student organizations. But I think your roommate is just another opportunity to connect with another person outside of your social circle from high school, and just a good way to to branch out. So I would tell students to try to find someone that they don't know going in. I know students might be kind of worried about whether or not they'd get along, but again, if they use a service like ours, or if they use something that either the school provides or one of the Facebook groups, they can find someone that they'll be comfortable living with and that they'll get along with.
Okay, great. Well, you are an entrepreneur, so I know you also have a couple other websites and one about textbooks. So why don't we jump into that avenue? Can you give me the name of that website and how that works? Yeah,
so that website is called Textsurf.com. And it's a service that works much like Expedia or Kayak for flights, but we're actually showing price comparisons for textbooks. And so we actually shop prices from a number of different textbook providers like Amazon, Chegg, Book Renner, and a couple of other textbook vendors as well. And what we typically see is incoming freshmen tend to go and purchase their books at the on-campus bookstore, which, in my experience and in most students' experience is the most expensive place to buy your books. You're typically, not getting used books there. You're typically getting new books and you're paying full list price for those books. And I think what a lot of students don't realize is that there are other options out there. A book might cost you $250 at the bookstore on campus, and you can actually find that same book on Amazon or Chegg or one of these other sites for $100 or $75. And then when you start to talk about rental options, they can get down to the $50s or $40s. So there's tremendous savings to be found if you do a little research and not just go for convenience by buying at the bookstore. And so what typically happens is as students progress through their 4 years, the juniors and seniors that have been around longer, you typically won't see them at the bookstore. They'll be buying, online because they've kind of learned their lesson from the first couple of years that, the bookstore is not the optimal place to buy books.
Right. So how do you actually know what books you should have?
So the school, your professors will send out a syllabus that will list kind of the required course material. So they'll have, the book title, author, ISBN number, all of that information. And so you kind of go from there, and you can, again, you take that information to your campus bookstore, or you can type that into our site, or, any other textbook sites. And that's kind of how you would go about finding your book. The other thing I'd say on that is a lot of times, what happened with me when I was in school is, we would, get our syllabi and our syllabus, and we get the required textbooks, and you'd find that the professor didn't even really, follow the textbook or use the textbook that much. So it's also a good idea to maybe wait a few days and just get a sense for how much the course will follow the textbook. And if it's not going to really follow it that closely, it may not even be worth making that purchase, because again, if you're taking 5 or 6 classes, the textbook prices can really, or costs can really sneak up on you and become pretty expensive. So that's a way to kind of hedge your risk on spending too much on textbooks, by just kind of waiting and seeing how the course is going to go.
Right. Now, I guess a caution for parents out there is, know your student and don't let him use or her use the money card to not perform well in school and say, well, I don't own the textbook, so I couldn't read it. So there's kind of a catch-22 there. But for the right students, they certainly can determine if they're going to use the textbook or want the textbook, or if the textbook is required, or using an older version, or sharing a textbook. The industry itself is kind of interesting in that the textbook companies, math really hasn't changed all that much. Pre-algebra has been pre-algebra for the last 10, 20, 30 years. And a book that's 5 years old and a book that's brand new probably isn't all that different.
Right.
But the textbook companies can't make any money if you use something that's been floating around, and so they need to upgrade their textbooks. So they give a lot of incentives to the colleges themselves to say, well, why don't you use the newest version? And they provide them free to the professors, and they provide some online materials and lecture notes and other things. And, they're trying to get the colleges to use the latest and greatest textbooks. And again, the universities and those professors may not care all that much because they're not the ones buying the books.
Right.
So one little pet peeve of mine as far as how that whole process works. But anyway, so if they use your site, then they can ultimately click through to other places and buy the textbooks or rent them or whatever it might be.
Exactly. So, for example, if you came to TextSurf and you typed in, the ISBN number for one of your books that you needed, or you can also type in a keyword, you'll find the book in the search. You'd click through, and then you'd be able to see a price comparison. So we'd show you the list price. So I'm actually looking at one book here, Fundamentals of Corporate Finance. List price is $297.67. And we've got 6 different buying options, or 3 buying options and 3 rental options. So the price differential is amazing. You can buy it new for $297, or you could rent it from Book Renter for only $42, which is unbelievable. So you basically click through whichever option is most attractive, and then you complete the transaction on that site.
So what about the idea of buying textbooks so that you own them? Do you own your old textbooks? Do you ever look at them again? What's your opinion on that?
No, I definitely don't own my old textbooks. I got into doing rentals in my junior year, just because it was a lot more affordable, and I didn't feel like I would have to refer back to them for any reason. So I just rented them for a semester and returned them at the end of the semester. I guess it just depends on, what you're going into. Maybe you'll have to refer back to some things in your textbooks. And if you feel that, by all means, you can buy them. I'd say try to buy them, used if you can, because you'll save some money. But it's really up to kind of what the student feels and thinks.
What about resale value? So obviously, if people are buying used textbooks, that means people are selling used textbooks.
Yep.
So if I buy a used textbook for $100, can I generally sell that used textbook for $100 or $50 or what? What do you see out there?
Oh no. Well, depending on who you sell it to, if you try to sell it peer to peer, like sell it to another student on campus that might be taking that course the next semester, you probably earn a little bit more than you would trying to sell back to your on-campus bookstore. They're gonna try to buy it for as cheap as possible, and so they can resell it for as much as possible. So my recommendation would be to try to find another student that's going to be taking that class and try to sell it back to them rather than trying to take it back to the bookstore, because you're just not going to get much for it.
Would you get more selling it back to Amazon or Chegg or one of these other companies?
I really don't think so. I think your best bet is to try to sell it to a student that's already there. I don't think you're going to get very much for it selling to these retailers.
Okay. Where do you see textbooks going in the longer term? Is electronic methods going to be taking over anytime soon, or what's been your experience?
So we have some electronic options on our site. We don't see a lot of transactions for e-textbooks yet, but I think over time we're going to start to see a lot more of that, of kind of the digital editions for iPad and some of these other reading devices. I think that's the future, but I don't think that that's going to really take hold for quite a while. I think there's just something about having a physical, book that you can flip through that you just, that you can't really get that same experience by, reading a book on an iPad, or at least a textbook, right, in my opinion. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for sure.
Right. And I think there's a generational thing going on as well. I can't imagine studying without a physical book that you can leaf through and that kind of stuff. But my son, who's in sixth grade, a lot of his classes, they issued him an iPad for school, and now they don't issue textbooks for most of his classes. So he's being trained that, how to study in an alternate method. And I think he'll be more comfortable when he gets to college,
right,
not having an actual textbook. So we'll see. It would be interesting to see how that transpires over the years.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I appreciate all the great information you've shared. We've got a couple of great websites that people can use. But before I let you go, can you give us 3 quick tips that could help parents and students that are venturing into this college quagmire?
Sure. I guess my first tip would be to, definitely go on campus tours and, go and visit the schools that you're interested in if they're nearby and you can find the time, because it'll, definitely give you a good sense for, what that school is like. Try to talk to some of the students that are there and, get, an honest opinion on their experience. And if there's any way that you can sit in on a class, that might be of interest, that's also a great way to just get a sense of, how college might differ from, your high school classes and things like that. I guess the second tip I would say is, and like I mentioned earlier, nowadays with these social networking sites, you can start to build your social circle before you even get to campus. So with these Facebook, class groups, or even using hashtags on Twitter for your incoming freshman class for the different schools that you're applying to, you can communicate and get in on the conversation without even being at that campus, and that's a great way to kind of network and meet people that might be going there. And then I guess the third thing that I would say is, at least on the the roommate front, is just be open to different types of people. Like I said, if you're going into a school where you might have several people from your high school that you already know, I'd recommend not rooming with them and trying to branch out and meet new people and try to find a roommate that you don't know yet, because you just never know. I mean, my roommate from college, I ended up starting a company with, a few companies, and we've become best friends, and it's been a great experience. And I could have lived with someone that I went to high school with, but decided to branch out, and I'm glad that I did.
All right. Great advice. And I'm going to do one quick follow-up because you mentioned something, and I think for parents out there, I want to get a little more information. So let's say I am interested in attending, let's say Duke.
Yeah.
And now we're saying what you say, let's find the social networks or whatever. Give me examples of what you actually would do or type in. So you go to Facebook or you go to Twitter, and what do you actually search for? Or
Yeah. So let's say you're going to Duke and you're going to be enrolling for, this fall. So you just hop on Facebook, go into the search bar, and you just type in Duke class of 2019 or 2020, whatever your graduating year would be. You would type that in, and then you'll see sometimes the university will set up a Facebook page that you can like, and then you'll actually be able to get updates from the school that's targeted to that incoming class. And a lot of times there will be a group where students that have applied or even been accepted can communicate and engage with each other in a Facebook group. So that's the Facebook side. And then on Twitter, what typically happens is the school will usually send out some type of hashtag for the incoming class. So it would be like hashtag Duke 2019. And so if you kind of just do a little searching on Twitter in their search bar, you'll be able to identify that hashtag. And if you click that hashtag, you can see all the Twitter posts that include that hashtag, which is probably going to be students that have been accepted or plan to apply to that school. And there's a lot of interesting conversations going on with those hashtags. So it's a great way to kind of follow the conversation and even get engaged.
Right. No, it sounds like you just mentioned that the colleges may be facilitating some of this as well.
Yeah, and some cases it's the colleges, and in some cases it's just the students that are doing it.
Right. So you could ask at the college as well as part of your tour, or just paying attention to the material they're sending, where they might actually give you some hints as well.
Exactly.
All right. Well, great. I appreciate the additional information. It was such a good tip. I had to delve into it a little bit. So, all right. If people want to learn more about what you've got going on or contact you, how can they do that?
Yeah. So they can see more about us if they go to www.ecampusventures.com. That will talk all about our 3 products, Roomsurf, TextSurf, and Join You. And you can kind of see what we're doing there, and also get in contact with us if you have any questions.
All right. I appreciate the great information, Justin, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you for listening today. That's all we have. Again, as a reminder, we do have show notes available at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/41 for episode 41. If you're new to podcasting, also be aware that you can actually subscribe to podcasts through iTunes, through Stitcher.com, through applications on your smartphone or applications on your iPod or Surface or tablet or other electronic devices. So there's ways that you can subscribe to Taming the High Cost of College and get every episode. Or you can go directly to the website at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com, and all the episodes are available there, and you can click and download them there or listen right on your computer. Again, thank you for listening today. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns 2 companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.